Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Dark and Stormy Nights. Tier is bringing us I don't know, is it action-packed? Is that a good description?
No, not really. I got a filler chapter. So.
It's a filler chapter, so we're just bridging a gap here.
I mean, basically.
Is it still exciting? Like, somebody's dying, so
Someone's
there's that.
dying, yeah. So there's a little bit of tension, some drama.
So, yeah, okay, so we've got that going for us. That'll make it exciting. So I'll beat people up in next chapter.
Okay, sounds
All
good.
right, we'll kill things then.
Yeah.
So, all right. You got any prefacing or anything like that, or you want to just get into it?
No, when we left off, you had brought everybody back through the portal. So Annalise is here with her army, and then she split after she delivered a killing wound to Eliot.
They kind of faded into the woods.
Right. So there's just kind of a follow-up from your chapter?
They probably do have her sword, so there's that.
Oh, I didn't even address that.
I mean, I don't know that it means anything. We could make it mean something, you know. But I assume that they just gave her the sword, you know, on the other side. So.
Okay.
But. All right. Well, if you want to get into it, go for it.
Okay. All right. Hurry, Lee, through here. Nigel rushed ahead and held open the door to the huntsman, directing Lee to the room behind the counter. What had once appeared to be a rundown break room was now a workroom filled with modern leather furniture and several work tables with various supplies spread out on top of them. The walls were lined with shelves filled with books, supplies, and ingredients. Nigel once again rushed past, sweeping items from one of the less cluttered tables and motioning for Lee to set Eliot down. Lee rushed to lay Eliot out, and Wren resumed applying pressure to his wound. His arm hung limply over the side of the work table, and his skin was a deathly pallor. Lee's chest squeezed with panic as his eyes scanned the room for some kind of remedy, a cure-all, a stab wound remover, a token of invincibility, something, anything. A tear slipped down Wren's cheek, hitting the blood-soaked fabric of Eliot's shirt, and Lee's eyes fixated on the spot, dread pooling deep in his gut. Had he ever seen Wren cry before? Sobbing drew his attention to the leather sofa along the wall, where Rowan watched in horror while Gary tried to console Shayla next to her. Nigel plucked books and objects from the shelves before taking over for Wren. Lee shuffled back a step, and Wren tucked herself into his side. Nigel placed a clear crystal with a lightning bolt-shaped streak of purple down the center. He placed his hand over the top, shedding his glamour at the same time as his coffee mug became a staff and slammed into the ground. Eliot's body arched up off the table. Shocks of purple sparked around and he dropped back down, twitching from the jolt. The room paused collectively, as if holding their breath, but when his head again rolled to the side, Nigel jumped back into action. He uncorked a vial that looked like blood and poured it over Eliot's chest, murmuring words until ethereal specters circled the room. The wind picked up, throwing Lee's hair into his face, but died just as quickly. Nigel's shoulders fell. Nigel, Lee croaked. Nigel's back was to him, but he saw the tremble of his shoulders and the shake of his head nonetheless. There has to be something you can do, Rowan pleaded. Nigel sighed, raising his staff in one hand while placing the other on Eliot's chest. Both hands glowed, and Eliot's body once again arched into Nigel's power. By the time Eliot's back hit the table again, Nigel's staff was pressed into his chest. A blast of light flooded the room, blinding everyone as silence descended. Lee blinked spots from his eyes, both desperate and reluctant to see the outcome. When the room came into focus, Nigel was still hovering over Eliot, breathing heavily and leaning on his staff. Lee rushed around the table, taking up Eliot's other side. His wide eyes were glued to the stillness of Eliot's chest. Nigel, what did you do? Nigel pushed himself up with his staff, the exertion showing in the strain of his tight expression. The only thing I could think of, Lee. Lee's throat closed up, his eyes glued to the bloody mess of Eliot's chest, his mouth open to argue, to deny, to rage against the idea that Eliot was gone, when the ever-so-slight rise of his chest held his tongue. I put him in stasis, Lee. Nothing I tried was working, and frankly, he's running out of time. The only thing I could think to do was buy us a little more. Nigel's voice was thin, more worn down than Lee was used to seeing him. How much time, Nigel? Nigel's weary eyes met his, more resigned than reassuring. A few hours? Maybe a day? It's hard to say, Lee. I gave him as much time as I could. Hopefully it will be enough for us to think of something. Lee's eyes wandered the shelves of books and artifacts. Then let's start looking. What did you try? What do we need? Nigel rubbed his temple. The unicorn blood didn't work because we didn't have a sacrifice. I asked the spirits for help, but without payment for the spell, there wasn't enough power. The crystal restarted his heart, but didn't have enough magic left to repair the wound, and they take weeks to recharge. I'm not sure what more could be done, but we have a little time to figure it out. And where are we off to then, Lady Annalise? Crag, the Spridgen in charge of her mother's army, asked from the back of the beast he rode. The creature, though small, was ruthless, was a ruthless general, according to her mother. Annalise had quickly learned that size did not always account for strength in the Fey world. We're going to the underground, to the Fey communities, to gather more allies here on Earth. The hunters cut off our army, but I still have a few loyal here as well. Crag didn't bother to hide his disdain at the thought. The Earthbound Fey are not warriors. The army you seek does not compare to the one you lost. Annalise huffed out a breath. This is the army we have. I'm not going up against sorcerers without the manpower we need to take them on. These people are soft. They don't know war. They don't train. They don't fight. They don't sharpen their skills. How do you expect to get them through war alive when they've no time to train? Annalise shrugged. The goal is to fight the sorcerers and take my rightful place. I promised them freedom from the sorcerer's rule. I never promised that it wouldn't come without a price. Something that approximated a smile tugged at the creature's withered lips. You may do your mother proud yet. Annalise lifted her chin and marched ahead to face the growing crowd of onlookers. You may have been wondering where I disappeared to, she shouted into the crowd. The confused looks they shot her indicated that they hadn't really noticed her absence. The Spridgen shot her a doubtful look, but she continued on. I will not be ruled by the people who have betrayed us all any longer. Many of you let your fear that we will be defeated make the decision for you, but I do not give up so easily. I've returned from the Fey world with the power to take them on. On your own and untrained, we may not have had a chance. She stepped aside to gesture to the soldiers and beasts she'd managed to pull through the portal before it closed. Murmurs ran through the crowd, some wary, some excited. But we are no longer alone. The Fey Queen sends her regards, and her soldiers. For too long, the sorcerers have held us under their oppressive thumb, knowing that we didn't have the means or the knowledge to fight back. But we will be their victims no longer. We will cede our power no longer. This time for standing by while they destroy our communities is over. Now is the time to strike. Join me, and we will take back what is rightfully ours. Annalise noticed some in the crowd nodding their agreement as she spoke, and still others who remained unmoved by the change in odds. The sorcerers have been attacking us and stealing our powers for centuries. Will you allow them to continue their crimes and leave them for your children to deal with? Annalise paced to the end of the crowd, coming face to face with the three witches she'd risen. Though she'd been the one to bring them back, she held no sway over them. Or will you stand up now and fight for their future? She finished. The tallest witch lifted her chin in defiance. We fight for our future. We fight for our bloodlines, but we do not fight for you. The witch next to her glared. We will not be rushed into battle, nor will we tether our descendants' future to yours. Not before we can be sure of your intentions. We will not trade one oppressor for another. The third witch continued. The sorcerers have offered to hear us out. We will see what they have to say before we make a decision. Annalise refrained from attacking the witches. They had a following among the community, and she couldn't risk making enemies of them just yet. The sorcerers have already attacked. They killed several members of my army. Those of you who understand the threat and are willing to fight, come with me. I will show you victory. The tall witch shook her head. Those who bring an army to the negotiation table aren't there to speak. Annalise gritted her teeth and turned to face the rest of the crowd. Gather the supplies that you need and meet me in the marketplace. We must begin planning at once. She turned and led her army away from the group, knowing that she'd gained a few more followers that saw the opportunity for what it was, a chance to defeat the sorcerers. Lee slammed a heavy leather-bound book closed and pinched the bridge of his nose. Ren rubbed a hand over his shoulder soothingly. Nothing there either? Resurrection spells that would turn him into a flesh-eating ghoul. Not exactly helpful. Huh, Gary huffed from across the room. Lee looked up hopefully. Say, Lee, how attached is Eliot to human food? Lee raised an eyebrow. Pretty attached, I'd imagine. Why? So, blood would be out of the question then. We're not turning Eliot into a vampire, Gary. Just looking at the options, Lee. What about werewolf venom, Rowan asked. If we could find someone to turn him, it may save his life. There's only one pack in the area, but I'm sure I could find a way to contact them. Lee grimaced. Yeah, that's not going to work. The pack in the area has Eliot on their hit list. Finding out he's dying just saves them a step. Lee's eyes wandered over to Nigel, where he sat engrossed in a large tome. You finding anything over there, Nigel? Nigel startled, as if he'd been lost in thought. I'm afraid not. My knowledge of saving those on the brink of death is limited to one method, and it comes at a high price, one that Eliot can't consent to. Lee shifted uncomfortably and turned his attention back to Rowan. Where is Raina, and why didn't she report that you were attacked? Rowan frowned and looked down at her lap. Raina is dead. She's been dead since before I became an apprentice. Nigel turned to look at the nymph. That was months ago. How's that possible? I never met the real Raina before she was killed by Annalise. Annalise the Fey warrior, Nigel clarified. That would have had to have been a powerful glamour for me to not see through it. Annalise agreed. I think that sorry.
Rowan agreed.
Yes, Rowan agreed. The Fae specialize in glamours. Lee stood. His fingers itched to reach for his gun. You work for Annalise, the woman who stabbed Eliot, and you have the nerve to be here pretending to care? Rowan shook her head. I don't work for her. She owned me. I was given to her through no choice of my own, and I had no choice but to obey. There's always a choice. You betrayed Eliot, Lee growled. Nigel cleared his throat. That's not true in our world, Lee. You should know that better than most. You too had your choice taken away to pay a debt, and it's likely that Rowan's contract was far less lenient than your own. Lee's glare snapped to Nigel, ready to argue before he realized he was right. It had been less than a day since he'd turned over the Bodak's remains and celebrated his own freedom. Mere hours since the chains that bound him to the sorcerers and the huntsmen were cut after years of service. Silently conceding the point, he turned back to Rowan. Tell us everything. Rowan shifted in her seat, the dark rings under her eyes still present after her brush with death, but Lee couldn't find it in himself to feel bad. Free will or not, the girl's actions had cost Eliot. My service was promised to Annalise before my birth, and I was given to her at a young age, but I have been her servant ever since. I don't have the freedom of telling her no. I don't have the option of betraying her orders, but even so, I tried to help Eliot where I could. Annalise is not just some disgruntled fae. She's been around for hundreds of years. If you're wondering how she knew about the changeling children or the witch trials, or the indiscretions of many of your sorcerers, it's because she was there to witness it. Annalise was raised with the understanding that she would one day take her mother's seat on the Combine, and then she watched as the sorcerers eliminated the seats of the others, one by one, until her mother was forced back through the veil to return to her throne. Annalise was too young to do anything at the time, but she didn't sit idly by. She spent decades learning, researching, and when she came across a way to bring the Bodak through, she knew the time to make her move had come. Nigel rubbed his temple. Annalise is the daughter of Queen Landra Akande, and she has an army. I don't get it, Gary interrupted. Why the Bodak? I get they took out a few hunters with the changelings, but not enough sorcerers to make a difference in the fight. She was sowing the seeds of conflict, turning the communities against us, Nigel answered. Rowan nodded. She needed an army. Telling someone their history might make them angry, but it's not likely to send them to war. Show them the devastating atrocities carried out against them, and those like them, and you can sway them to your cause. And the army she brought through, Lee questioned, glaring down at Eliot's body. Not part of the original plan, but she was losing the support of the communities. She never expected the sorcerers to agree to negotiate, and while equal representation is enough for most of the others, it was never what Annalise was after. Then what was she after, Gary questioned. A throne, Nigel concluded. This is not good. I have to discuss this with the Combine before the war shows up on our doorstep. Nigel's exit was stopped almost immediately by Lee. What about Eliot? How much time does he have left? Nigel frowned at the spell surrounding Eliot's body. Time is not on our side there, Lee. That spell can only hold back the inevitable for so long. There has to be something you can do, Nigel. We can't let him die. What would you have me do, Lee? You know what my capabilities are. That kind of magic has a heavy cost, and Eliot is not able to pay it. I'll pay it, Rowan interrupted. Whatever the cost, I'll find a way to work it off. Nigel shook his head. It's not that kind of debt, Rowan, and you already belong to another and cannot commit to this price. She slumped back in her seat, chewing on her bottom lip. Lee growled and scrubbed a hand over his face. Something rippled through the room, and Nigel's attention shot to the doorway. What the hell was that? Lee demanded. Nigel touched his staff to a blank wall, and an image rippled over it. The building security has been triggered. The outside of the tower came into focus, showing Annalise's army moving in. And it looks like she's picked up a few more. Nigel turned to face Lee, the regret clear on his face. It's now or never, Lee. We're out of time. Lee sighed, his eyes glued to the fight ahead, his hope tied to his friend on the table behind him. Do it, Nigel. Save the kid. I'll pay the debt. All right, that
was
it.
seat gripping.
Was it?
No, it's pretty good. I mean, no, it was because you did a great job explaining the gaps. There were certain things we hadn't explained till now. We knew we were coming to a head, and they had to come out.
Right.
And it does. It felt just like one of those scenes in a movie where it all starts coming together, and you're like, oh. Right. I just watched one last night. It wasn't a good movie, but they had a great coming together scene, and that was the one saving grace of this movie. And that's what I felt like. It was suddenly everything falls into place, and you're like, oh, shit. You know? Yeah. Not that our listeners haven't heard us talking about that Annalise.
Right.
You know? But I think that once the book is written, that it'll be that moment where people are like...
Where it comes together.
Motherfucker.
Yeah, for
you
the
know?
reader.
So, yeah. No, good stuff. Okay. So, we'll come back next week, and we'll discuss where we go from here. So, sound good?
Yep, sounds good.
In the meantime, go over to the Dark Stormy K1 on Twitter, r/Dark and Stormy Nights on Reddit, the Dark and Stormy Nights on Facebook. You can find the podcast anywhere podcasts can be found, and on YouTube. Don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, comment, rate, whatever it is. So we appreciate all of that. Get the word out there about us and help us grow. Thank you.
Bye.
See you next time.